Hello, everybody. Ted Haggard here from the Storehouse in Colorado Springs. If you're interested in looking us up online, we are at the storehouse.homes, the storehouse.homes. And you'll notice the full address at the bottom of the screen, and you're welcome to come here and just check out things. We meet as a house church, which is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us. We absolutely love it. And it's a house church that is the ministry of St. James Church here in Colorado Springs. This morning, we're looking at 1 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, which is about relationships in the church, relationships with leaders, relationships with one another. And so in this chapter are some of the points of wisdom for every one of us to have wisdom, or for every one of us to have healthy relationships. So healthy relationships are based on one another's judgments, and people judge us. Now, I know. We say, oh, who are we to judge another person's servant? That was in the book of Romans. Or how do we do that? Well, all of us are responsible for having competent judgments, and all of us are responsible to know that we will be judged. It's just a reality. And so we are responsible for the things we say, for the things we do, and the thoughts we think. And so as we work through life, we've got to grow in that understanding. So there are 3 judgments that are highlighted in this chapter. One judgment is the judgment of people. People will judge us, and they will judge what we say. They will judge what we do. Right now, as I'm recording this, we are in the midst of some midterm campaigns. All of our Congress is going to be voted on. Some of the people in the Senate are going to be voted on. Lots of issues with our local elections are going to be voted on. And we know there's a difference between one type of school board member and another type of school board member. If a school board member believes that children belong to their parents, and the school system is there to educate the children as a service to the parents, that's one type of school board member. If a school board member believes that students really belong to them, and that the government is the ultimate decision maker regarding what a student receives, that's a different type of school board member. We have to make those judgments when we vote. The same way with a mayor. If a mayor believes he's a public servant, he or she is a public servant, that's one thing. If a mayor believes that they are kind of the king of the city and the citizens are there to serve them, that's a totally different type of mayor. And so we had an issue just here north where Larkspur, Colorado did not want to grow economically, but Castle Rock, Colorado did want to grow economically. So Castle Rock accepted a large development for housing and for a big mall, a big outlet mall, and things like that. And today you drive north of Colorado Springs, and you see that because of an election and what that city council did, Castle Rock is booming. And it's in Douglas County. Douglas County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Colorado. Just south of there is Larkspur. Larkspur had the opportunity to get those very same things, and they voted against them. And so you go to Larkspur right now, and it is a sleepy community. And so that's how elections work. So we have to know that we're going to be judged by people. When people choose a church, they're judging the people within that church. When people choose a community, they're judging the people within that community. You are in some function, and so people are going to judge you. All right. The second type of judgment is that we judge ourselves. Every one of us see ourselves one way or another, and we tend to rationalize our own decisions about ourselves. And sometimes we see ourselves accurately. Other times we don't see ourselves accurately. And so I jokingly tell people sometimes our enemies are the first ones to tell us the truth about ourselves, because our friends tend to see the positive things about us and ignore the negative things about us, where our enemies tend to see the negative things about us and ignore the positive things about us. We certainly see that in our political world today. And so we need to have an accurate way to judge ourselves. And that's why I encourage people to be in a good Bible study. We have an excellent Bible study here at the Storehouse on Wednesday nights where we discuss the scriptures. We do the same thing on Sunday mornings. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to judge ourselves. And we develop good friendships. So it's a good way for us to allow others to judge us and give us comments about our lives. And so we've got to understand we're going to be judged by people. We've got to understand we've got to judge ourselves. And then we've got to understand we are going to be judged by God. And we are ongoingly and judged by God. That's why we get convicted. That's why we have a conscience. That's why we have those things going on in us so that we understand we're being judged by God as we go along. But there will be an eternal judgment for everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do. So for people that say, I am my own person, I don't want to be judged, they're just living in a fog, because all of us are judged. When you want a job, you're being judged. When you want a political position or a voice, you're being judged. The better people perceive you, the more voice you're going to have. We have to earn the right to be heard. We don't intrinsically have the right to be heard. So I know people that write their legislators all the time and they think they're being heard, but a staff member just sends a standard response to them to make them think they're being heard, but they're not. All right, because they haven't heard the right to be heard. And so it's worth it to develop the credibility so that you can be heard. Okay. This is Paul's letter, 1 Corinthians 4, Paul's letter writing to the Corinthians about these issues. Notice how he begins. So look at Apollos. Now, Apollos was taller than Paul. Apollos was more articulate than Paul. Apollos was more handsome than Paul. And Apollos was more popular than Paul. All right, we know Paul today because he wrote the letters. Apollos didn't write. All right, but back then, Apollos was the guy. He was the guy, and Paul was the writer, but Paul was not handsome. Paul was short. Paul was not articulate, and Paul tended to be somewhat offensive. All right. He didn't do the best job at keeping friends to stick with him. And so anyway, it's kind of funny to watch these things as history goes by. But Paul says, so look at Apollos and me as mere servants of Christ who have been put in charge of explaining God's mysteries. And it was because in many churches, certainly the church in Corinth, there was a group of people that thought Paul was awesome. There are probably those who like deeper studies, all right, where others thought Apollos was awesome, and they formed their own camps. All right. So Paul was saying here, look at both of them as servants, not as leaders of a troop, but as servants. Look at both of them as servants who put in charge of teaching and explaining God's mysteries. Now, of course, every Bible teacher and every pastor explains God's mysteries with a different personality and a different emphasis. So he's encouraging that. In verse 2, he says, now, a person who is put in charge as a manager must be faithful. So he talks about the twofold role that Apollos and Paul both have. Servants of Christ, as explaining God's mysteries, and as a manager. He does not establish them as totally authoritarian. He does not claim chain of command authority. Instead, he argues for authority in the churches in his letters. All right. So he describes them both as servants and managers, and that they must be faithful. As for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or by any human authority. So here he's saying he's a servant to explain God's mysteries. He's a manager of God's kingdom, all right? But he understands he's going to be evaluated by the people in the churches and by human authority, but he's saying it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you. In other words, the people's evaluation of him was not the determining factor on what he said and did. All right. Now, notice what he says here. I don't even trust my own judgment on this point. All right. So he's acknowledging that we all have blind spots and that we all have things that bring about questions that other people might see. But he is saying he doesn't trust his own judgment on this point, but he says, my conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove I'm right. So he's saying it's important to have a clear conscience, but that doesn't mean he is the ultimate authority. He also says it is the Lord himself who will examine me and decide. So here he is saying he is not letting the judgment of the average people in the congregation or the church be the ultimate authority of what he says, what he does, how he teaches, those types of things. Now, he is acknowledging that, though. He's also saying he has a clear conscience, but that doesn't mean he's right about everything. But then he says, ultimately, the Lord's judgment of me is the final word. All right. And this is because when people judge other people, there's no way for them to know all the variables. All right. So that's why every one of us have to be gracious toward others and mind our own business toward others and be kind toward others and edifying. That's why we've got to understand that when we judge ourselves, we do the best we can on the day we have to do it. But that doesn't mean we're doing it perfectly. And that every one of us ultimately trust the judgment of God in our lives because he loves us and he's given his life for us, and that there will be eternal benefit from his judgment in our lives. So verse 5. So don't make judgments about anyone ahead of time. Now, this is an absolutely fascinating exhortation that Paul makes here. Don't make judgments about anyone ahead of time before the Lord returns. So here's what he's saying here. He's saying everybody is in process. Nobody will be in 2 years the way they are today. Everybody is developing. Everybody is in process. So we in the church have to understand everybody is going through a process. Everybody is growing in the Lord. Everybody is developing. And so people may be the way they are today, but we Christians know people change. All right. And people develop. So my wife and I have just decided we're going to be gracious toward people. And we take the same stance the Apostle Paul does here in this text. He says, so don't make judgments about anyone ahead of time before the Lord returns, for he will bring darkest secrets to light and will reveal our private motives, where none of us know those things about one another, and we don't want to actually. All right. It says, then God will give to each one whatever praise is due. So, dear brothers and sisters, I have used Apollos and myself to illustrate what I've been saying. If you pay attention to what I have quoted from the scripture, you won't be proud of one of your leaders at the expense of another. You hear this? For what gives you the right to make such a judgment? What do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? Okay, so here the Apostle Paul is encouraging every single one of us to be wise in these types of things and just be gracious. And so we don't have to say everything we think about everybody, but what we have to do is be edifying, encouraging, faithful, loyal, steadfast, consistent, all those types of things, and life will work out better for us. Before we became such an arrogant society, many people were members of the same church for 20 or 30 years. All right. Now it tends to be more of a consumer thing where people tend to switch around more easily. I would encourage every one of us to become more stable, to become more solid, to become more consistent, and to adopt these principles. The rest of this chapter is excellent. I encourage you to read it and study it. It will feed you deeply, but that's all of our time today. And so thank you for being here today. You can look at some of the other sermons and maybe get some fresh ideas that will encourage you. And like I say, if you're here in Colorado Springs, it'd be great to see you some Sunday or Wednesday. Okay, God bless you. Bye-bye.